All right, so today we're going to be tackling something pretty heavy. Nietzsche's views on pity. You might be thinking like, pity? What's so controversial about that?
Mm.
Well, Nietzsche actually saw it as potentially a lot more harmful than most of us would think. And we're working with some excerpts here from an academic text that really digs into his philosophy. So get ready for some pretty thought-provoking concepts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it really all comes down to how Nietzsche defines pity in the first place. He doesn't see it as just basic empathy, right? For him, it's more about like taking on someone else's suffering, almost as if it were your own.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like absorbing their pain.
Hmm.
So how does that become harmful then?
Well, Nietzsche argued that this kind of like intense identification with suffering, it can actually prevent growth. Like if you're constantly focused on someone's pain and weakness, you might unintentionally be making those things worse. Instead of helping them overcome their challenges, you're kind of reinforcing this idea that they're helpless.
That's a really interesting point. So I guess it's like focusing on the problem ends up making the problem even bigger.
Exactly. And Nietzsche actually called pity a life-denying force.
Life denying. That's a pretty intense term. What did he mean by that?
Well, he believed that life is full of so much more than just suffering. There's joy, there's power, there's creativity. But pity, it kind of blinds us to all of that. We get so caught up in the negative that we miss out on everything else.
Yeah, so it's almost like we're choosing to dwell on the darkness instead of stepping into the light.
Exactly. And Nietzsche saw this tendency towards life denial as especially strong in Christian morality.
Okay, so this is where things are going to get a little tricky, I think. How does Christianity fit into all of this?
Well, Nietzsche saw Christianity as a system that really emphasizes suffering and pity. And he actually called it a slave morality.
Slave morality.
Yeah, because he thought it prioritized things like meekness and self-sacrifice above everything else.
So could you unpack that a little bit? What exactly did he mean by slave morality?
Sure, Nietzsche contrasted slave morality with something he called master morality. And master morality, it embraces strength, creativity, the will to power.
Hold on, wait a minute. When he says will to power, he's not talking about like dominating other people, is he?
No, not necessarily. It's more about like taking control of your own life, overcoming obstacles, being the best version of yourself.
Okay, so it's more about self-mastery than like ruling over others.
Exactly.
So Nietzsche thought that Christianity's focus on pity and suffering, it actually went against this idea of self-empowerment.
Right. And he actually saw Jesus as the ultimate symbol of this slave morality, someone who embraced suffering and sacrifice to the extreme.
Wow, that's a pretty intense interpretation. It definitely makes you think about suffering in a whole new way, both
Yeah.
on a personal level and as a society.
Now, it's important to clarify here, Nietzsche isn't saying we should just ignore suffering or be cruel.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
So then what's the alternative? If not pity, then how are we supposed to deal with suffering?
Well, Nietzsche was a big believer in what he called overcoming. He thought, yeah, suffering is part of life. We can't escape it. But we don't have to be defined by it either.
Okay, so instead of letting it consume us, we should be looking for ways to move through it.
Yeah, exactly. And he even had this concept of self-overcoming, or Selbstüberwindung, as he put it in German.
Selbstübersiegen.
Yeah, it sounds kind of intimidating.
I know.
But it's basically this idea of like pushing past your limits, confronting your weaknesses, and then coming out stronger on the other side.
So it's almost like using those difficult experiences to fuel your own personal growth.
Exactly. It's a shift in focus from like, woe is me, to, okay, what can I learn from this?
Okay, I like that. So this idea of overcoming, it goes beyond just our personal lives, right? Didn't Nietzsche think it had implications for society as a whole, too?
Absolutely. He was worried that a culture too obsessed with pity would become kind of stagnant. Like if we're always focused on weakness and suffering, how can we strive for anything more?
That makes me think of the whole idea of victimhood culture. You think Nietzsche would see that as part of the problem?
I think there's a good chance he would. Obviously, it's important to acknowledge when people are facing injustice and hardship. But Nietzsche might say that constantly dwelling on victimhood, it can actually hold us back, prevent progress.
Yeah, so it's all about balance.
Exactly. We have to find a way to acknowledge suffering without letting it completely define us, both individually and as a society.
Okay, and I know Nietzsche was really critical of pity, but was he totally against compassion as a whole?
Well, not necessarily. He believed in what you might call like a strength-based compassion. It's about helping people in a way that encourages them to become self-reliant.
Okay, so instead of just giving someone a handout, you're giving them a hand up.
That's a great way to put it.
Can you give me an example of what that would look like in a real-life situation?
Sure. Let's say your friend loses their job. Instead of just feeling sorry for them, you could offer to help them update their resume, or connect them with people in your network, or even encourage them to learn some new skills.
So it's about offering support that actually empowers them to find their own solutions.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even in difficult times, people still have strength and potential.
Yes. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Nietzsche, what's the big takeaway here? What do you think he really wanted us to get?
Well, I think his main point is that we need to completely rethink how we view suffering. Not just our own suffering, but the suffering of others as well.
Right.
He wants us to move away from this pity-based approach
Yeah.
and embrace strength and resilience and this idea of overcoming.
Yeah, and that's a pretty practical idea when you
Yeah.
think about it, especially nowadays when it seems like everyone's encouraging us to, you know, dwell on our problems and see ourselves as victims.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I think Nietzsche's challenge is actually really powerful. He's basically saying, like, look, even in the face of suffering, you still have a choice.
A choice in how you respond.
Exactly.
And that choice can make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of letting suffering define you, you can use it as a chance to grow and become stronger.
So for our listeners out there who are trying to wrap their heads around all of this, where do we even begin? How do we actually apply these ideas in our own lives?
Well, I think the first step is to become more aware of how pity works, both in ourselves and in our interactions with others.
Okay, so start paying attention to those moments when pity pops up.
Right. And ask yourself, am I actually helping this person or am I just making them feel more helpless?
And what happens when we realize that, yeah, we're kind of stuck in that pity trap? What do we do then?
Then it's time to shift gears. Focus on empowering solutions, encourage resilience, celebrate strength.
Yeah, it's like Nietzsche's calling us to be compassionate, but in a different way, a way
Mhm.
that sees the strength in others, even when they can't see it themselves.
That's a really good way to put it.
So as we come up from this deep dive into Nietzsche's world, I want to leave everyone with this thought. Next time you encounter suffering, whether it's your own or someone else's, remember Nietzsche's challenge. How can you respond in a way that encourages strength and resilience? And the possibility of overcoming.